Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Allison Kaplan, and I'm the owner of Adaptive Pediatric Therapy, providing in-home therapy services to kiddos in Southern New Hampshire and the Seacoast area. And I am here tonight with Pamela Plourde of Collaborative Education Solutions. She is a special education advocate, and I will hand it over to her to introduce herself a little bit.
Great. Thanks, Allie, for having me tonight. So nice to be able to collaborate and talk about how things are changing in the communities and in our schools. So a little bit about myself. My name is Pamela Plourde. I am the mom of 3 children with special needs. They are first and my foremost, kiddos who I'm focused on. But prior to that, I have been a special education teacher for many years. And currently I work as an education consultant and advocate, helping families just to understand their needs and their rights. And collaborating with specialists like you just to come together and talk about what the community really is looking to hear about and what they need.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I think your experience from a variety of different perspectives will definitely be super helpful to our families tonight. So we are here to talk about returning to school in the time of COVID, and families I know right now are really struggling with what their options are. This is a hard time for all of our families, but especially our families that have children with special needs. And it's so important to know what your rights are and what your options are in trying to find the best case scenario to set up your kiddo for success this school year. So if you want to just start, Pamela, by talking a little bit of some of the different options that the school districts are proposing and what some of those implications are for our kiddos.
Sure. So as most of you probably know, Governor Sununu really left decisions up to school districts depending on their communities. So a lot of the different reopening plans look different from district to district, depending on where your town or community is located. A lot depends on the prevalence of COVID-19. We, for example, live in Windham, New Hampshire, so we're a community that borders Massachusetts. So a lot of times, our communities take more precautions just because of that. But a lot of factors really played into these reopening decisions, including town budgets, union contracts, and the socioeconomic dynamics of communities and their access to high-speed internet and such. So to start, I just want to go through the different options that I've seen, in communities, that we've all been either experienced or, we're expecting to experience in the next couple of weeks. So to start off, I'm just going to talk a little bit about remote learning. I think we've all been through it, but it refers to the student learning from afar. Typically, this is referring to a learning model in which the student logs into a virtual classroom or a platform of some kind, like we are here, Allie, on Zoom. There are Google Classrooms, and the teacher will teach the students by posting videos or hosting live classes, linking websites or YouTube stations. People are really thinking outside of the box, right? So we're learning to teach from afar because, as we know, in the spring, we abruptly had to learn how to do that. So within the remote learning model, though, there were really 2 subtypes of models of learning. So we talk about synchronized learning and we talk about asynchronized learning or asynchronous learning. And so synchronized is real time, happening in the moment. Like think of Facebook Live or live streaming. So what your child would be experiencing in a synchronized model would be happening right there, right then, versus an asynchronized model will be similar to this video that we're posting, right? We're recording this, it's pre-recorded. There are lessons or materials that can really be accessed at any point in time, whether they're on a forum. And so there are pros and cons to each of them. I'm not going to get into that tonight. But, you might hear your school district talking about, them doing a blended model of synchronized or asynchronized lessons. And so, every school district, again, I think most, I haven't heard of any, to be honest, that aren't offering a remote learning option. So, outside of the remote learning model, many districts, though not all, unfortunately, are offering that in-person traditional schooling like you or I, Allie, had, right? You get on the bus at 8 a.m., you arrive at school at 8:40, you go throughout the school day with your classes, lunch, recess, though things might look different in every classroom. And so, that's more the traditional in-person model. And then we move to what's actually really common, and I'm hearing a lot of this, is that hybrid model. So in an effort to reduce classroom sizes and really maximize social distancing, because we have learned so much about this COVID-19 and precautions that we can take, such as mask wearing, social distancing. The CDC released out, their recommendations on if we're going to reopen schools, what's the safest way to do so. So depending on the school district, you're going to see these hybrid models. And what that means is that they're keeping or trying to keep particular students in cohorts or groups. Now, every school is doing this differently. I've heard many doing it just by the letter of your last name. And so they might say, letters A through M will go to school in person on Monday and Tuesday, and break and switch to remote learning on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And on Wednesday or Thursday Friday, M through Z, comes to school for their in-person session. And what that really does is allows, students to stay in these groups, which helps with contact tracing related to, a potential exposure. And it also gives the school district the flexibility if there is a suspected case or an outbreak in the community, for them to very easily switch back to remote learning without it really being disruptive, because children are really learning, to learn in person and can get that direct instruction and that personal connection with their peers and with their teachers, but also have that learning from afar model. The last model that I'll talk about briefly is the option to homeschool your child. So in the state of New Hampshire, you have the option to homeschool any child, and that's something that you can elect. That's a personal choice. And when you elect to homeschool your child, what you're essentially doing is withdrawing your child and taking ownership of their education. And that might sound kind of scary at first, right? Like you're in charge of your child's education. But there are a lot of benefits to homeschooling, to be honest. It truly allows you to have flexibility within your day. You can pace your curriculum however you really like. So if your child might be, for example, a mathematician and really advanced in mathematics, you might move through math lessons really quickly. But if he or she might struggle in reading or writing, that's an area that you can take a little bit more slowly and do, more focused instruction in that particular area. So the one thing that as an education consultant that I want to touch upon about homeschooling is that, when you take ownership of your child's education, you are also saying, that the school district is no longer in charge of their education, and that includes, that specialized instruction or those therapies that, as special needs families, that you may have been utilizing through your school district.
And for that, you're referring to their IEP services, right?
Yes, their IEP, their individualized education plans. So, with that being said, there are certainly ways to get services outside of an IEP. And I think that it's important to highlight to families, that if you decide to venture into this homeschooling community, and you're worried, oh gosh, my child's had speech, twice a week for 30 minutes, and he or she really needs that, or occupational therapy, or whatever it might be, that there are ways to, to achieve those therapies, to get in-home supports. And I know, Allie, that's something that your company specializes in. So can you tell us a little bit about, how families, might go about finding out about the services that you provide, or what sorts of other in-home supports that they could look to?
Yeah, so the one thing I do want to touch upon that's a little bit different and kind of opens the door a little bit in terms of looking at the difference between school-based occupational therapy and outpatient therapy, is that any services that the school is providing through your child's IEP are to address their ability to access the education and the curriculum. So if your child has a need or a delay that is preventing them from being able to learn in that school environment, a school OT is going to work on that and be able to address that. However, if your child has a need that is not directly impacting their ability to access that education, more likely than not, the school therapies will not make a goal and will not address that or find that child eligible. So the benefit of outpatient therapy is that you are able to address a wider variety of goals, and including, more home-based things like dressing, or, my child doesn't tolerate when I tip their head back to wash their hair during bathing, and toileting, although toileting can be addressed in the school as well. So a little bit more flexibility and freedom in terms of the areas and deficits that can be addressed. And then when you're looking at outpatient therapy, that can be provided in a couple different ways. Through your insurance is always great because you're spending a lot of money to get that insurance. So
You are
using those benefits when possible is always wonderful. But if you do have more limited insurance benefits, you run out of them, or you're just looking for a specialty provider, out of pocket or cash-based practices are also available. And then you're looking at either those that your child's getting those services in more of a clinic setting where you're bringing them into their therapy appointment, or a more home-based model, which is what we do at Adaptive Pediatric Therapy, where we're going into your home and working with your child. And especially with families that are choosing to homeschool, Pamela, you mentioned on a great point that allows that flexibility within the day, where you don't have a school schedule with strict school hours, and that whole learning environment is your school day. And as an OT working in the home, we can really help to, or any therapist working in the home, but we can really help to incorporate those therapies into what you're already doing and into your routines to help make your life easier instead of adding on one extra thing. But I think the important kind of takeaway is that, there's lots of options for how your child can receive these services. So whether you're accessing therapies through the school for your special needs child, whether you are paying out of pocket, whether you're accessing outpatient services through your insurance, there's a variety of ways. So I don't want that to be a fear for families in choosing one model or another. And whatever model you choose, I think there's a way that you can support your child.
I think that's a great point, Allie, is, you know, they're really, truly, in this 2020, 2021 school year, there really is no right or wrong answer. It's really what's best for your family. And so I think it's important for us, whether you're a mom or a caregiver, you know, just to take a step back and just take that load off, you know, really just think about your children as individuals, as learners, and know that you know them best. So there are various options schools are offering. You know, like you said, you have the option of utilizing home-based therapies or clinics through your insurance company. So I just want to talk briefly a little bit about that, Allie, as you mentioned. You know, it's a simple phone call when you're looking for a home-based provider. And as a mom whose child was in early intervention, I actually truly didn't even know that you could get therapy through insurance. And like you said, we spend so much money on it. It's crazy, you know. But it's a simple phone call to your insurance company to ask them how, you know, how coverage looks for them, you know, how many visits per year in a particular therapy area are covered. Is there a copayment? Is there a deductible that you have to meet? And you know, what criteria or diagnostic codes, and that sounds like a lot of jargon, but you know, ask them, say, you know, I have a child with autism and I think they could really benefit from occupational therapy. They have a lot of different needs. Talk about sensory processing disorder, for example. You know, I have a high functioning ASD kiddo of my own, and he performs very well in the classroom, but he falls apart when he gets home. And so, you know, having an in-home therapist to work on his sensory diet has been so helpful for our family and for his regulation, and his self-esteem and self-confidence. You know, and that's something that the school in our particular case has not and will not provide to him, even though he's, you know, he has an IEP. So, you know, definitely if you're in this homeschooling community or thinking about it, not sure if you want to take that leap, you know, start and see what your insurance might cover. You can ask about, you know, in-network providers, or if there aren't providers, you know, there are definitely ways to go about having an out-of-network provider actually be paid at an in-network rate, because your child is entitled to receive therapy. So know that there are a lot of options. I'm happy to answer more questions about that if anyone wants to message us after watching this Zoom call. And I'm sure, Allie, you can help them along as well, obviously being in the practice. You know, but I know we did have a couple of questions that folks had written in about, Allie, if you wanted to go through any of those by chance.
Awesome. So we had a question, and I will just read it exactly how it came in for you, Pam. With a hybrid model, 2 days in person, 3 days remote, how can all of the services be achieved? And then it's a two-part question. So the next part is, and in accordance with the governor's order not to waive special education needs.
Great. Well, I first want to just, you know, thank this mom for posting this thoughtful question. I think that this concern really affects many families across the state. So it's really important for you to know your rights and what your child's entitled to. So while I'm not confident or you know, that this is exactly the governor order that this particular mom was referring to, but Governor Sununu did send out an executive order called Executive Order number 64, and it says that school districts are required to adhere to all state and federal special education law requirements, including without limitation the IDEA Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 in the delivery of instruction and support services pursuant to any offered instructional model. And those are those models we were just talking about, including without limitation traditional instruction, distance learning. So distance learning is that remote or hybrid learning we talked about, or hybrid models consistent with the U.S. Department of Education and Guidance.
Are you going to break that down for us?
Yes, yes, I am. It's a lot. It's really wordy, you know. And I again will link. I belong to a number of different organizations and partners. PIC, the Parent Information Center, there we go, did a really nice article on this that really broke it down. So I'm going to link that because that was where, you know, I really had to process through. It's a lot of legal jargon. So for many families who are reading this, they're like, what does this executive order say? So really what this means is that your child is entitled to all of their services in their IEP. And so I just want to back up a little bit. So when we went into, I'll call it crisis schooling, for lack of a better term, back in March, these orders were not in place. And so many families are saying, but that didn't happen. I didn't have the supports. I didn't get the therapies. You're right. You didn't, and that's wrong. And you know, and Governor Sununu is trying to make that right. I truly do think he is. And so by putting this executive order in place, what he is saying is that it doesn't matter what mode of learning you've selected. So your school district gives you these 2 to 3 options, right? You've got traditional learning, you've got remote learning, and you've got this hybrid. Or they might not give you an option at all and say, everyone is remote. Truly depends on the district. But that those services that are in your child's IEP, they are entitled to. And so they might look a little different. And so I think that that it's important for us as parents to be somewhat flexible, but again, reasonable, and think about, you know, does this meet the criteria for effective delivery and instruction? So if your child, for example, receives speech and language services, you should determine with your special education team if he or she could access that speech therapy remotely. Now, for some children, they may be able to, with, for example, they have an articulation disorder, and otherwise, you know, have typical cognitive abilities. They may be just fine with a remote speech session. The time should remain the same. So if they get that therapy 30 minutes a week, just because it's on Zoom doesn't mean it should be any less. But if you, for example, have a child with autism who is unable to attend to a screen, and he or she receives speech services several times a week, you know, that child may not be able to perform in a Zoom setting. And you know, us as team members would know and understand that. If the team is giving you a hard time about this, you can go back to anecdotal experiences that you had and use that as your data. So while you may not have taken down that from March through June, your child was unable to attend to Zoom, or you know, was non-compliant during their therapeutic sessions and only made 5 out of 10 sessions. If you didn't write that down, because I'll be honest, we were all overwhelmed. I didn't even write the information down, and I'm a really great record keeper. You know, you can just speak about it anecdotally and say, this was our experience. This did not work. And, you know, I'm sorry it didn't work, but we need a plan in place so that our child can receive his or her services. And I know my rights, and I know per the governor's executive order 64, and you don't have to use all this jargon that I just said, but the school district will know what you're referring to.
Now, Pam, for these families, you know, and I'm sure that this applies to a lot of kiddos. I'm getting these kiddos that are coming in and seeking in-home therapies because their options have been remote Zoom therapies, and they haven't been effective for their child. So for a family that's in that situation, then what would you recommend as that next plan, or what are their options if that Zoom isn't effective?
Yeah, absolutely, Allie. So say medically your child can't attend school, right? And they can't attend to Zoom. So they really require this in-person form of therapy. So the school district has a couple of options, and you can work with them on this and see, you know, what's the best fit for your family. So they can send a district provider. So in other words, an occupational therapist that works for the school district out to your home to conduct their therapy. So if they're supposed to get 30 minutes of occupational therapy a week, you come up with a mutually agreed upon time. That provider should come out to your home and continue working on the goals that you have set forth in their IEP. Another option is that the school district could partner or contract with a local in-home provider or agency or clinic. This doesn't necessarily mean you medically can't, you know, go to school if they are fully remote. And say the occupational therapist is overloaded with cases in the school district, and they're saying, yeah, we just can't meet the demands. Your option is to present them with this and say, I understand these are unprecedented times. You know, let's move forward then if you cannot provide this for us, and let's contract with an in-home provider. That doesn't mean, Allie, and I want to be clear here, that doesn't mean that you're using your insurance to get that in-home service. It means the district is paying the provider. So if my son with autism who has handwriting delays and has 30 minutes of OT in his IEP, and the district is unable or unwilling to send a district provider out to their home, they could call your company and say, you know, Allison, I would like to contract with you and pay you directly. So the district is paying, you know, you to provide this service to a family. So that's another option. If you are in a remote learning model or this hybrid model, the district can ask you to bring your child to the school building, or if you can't arrange for your child to be brought to the school building, you don't have a vehicle, you don't have a license, you can't leave your other children at home for whatever reason, they need to provide not only the service, but the transportation to the school. So they could transport the child on a remote day in this hybrid model, say, to get their services and conduct their therapy outside of the school building in a one-to-one setting. So interestingly, a lot of schools, though not here in Southern New Hampshire, I haven't heard a lot of it, but a lot of schools are actually physically using outside as an outside space. So if you are too medically fragile or concerned about the potential exposure, you know, even with those precautions in place, such as masks and social distancing, some providers are providing therapy actually just in the outside environments. That could be outside in your home, that could be outside of the school. You know, another point that comes to mind is when you talk about these hybrid approaches, I think it's really important for parents to advocate that when their child is attending in-school learning, right, that time is so valuable that they have with their teacher, with their peers, that I would actually encourage you to find a way and work with the school district so they receive their therapies on a remote day. And I feel strongly about that because, you know, even though it might seem like a headache, Allie, I mean, like, what one of us want to throw our kids in the car and drive them to the school? But I truly feel that we don't want to take away from their opportunities, as few as they're going to be, with that in-person model. So children with considerable needs as well. So I think we talked about this. You had another question, maybe from, am I remembering this right, that she had a child with some considerable needs who needed a one-to-one?
Yeah, I think we have a couple questions coming up that touch upon that a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, the next question. I think just to kind of wrap up with that a little bit, you know, how can all of these services be fit in? I think that's a great point, is that, you know, just because you are in person for 2 days and remote for 3 days doesn't mean that all of those services need to be jam-packed into those 2 days. And to your point, you know, nor is that necessarily in your child's best interest. And I think it's a great point that you mentioned that, you know, while they're in school, they making use of that time in person with their peers and their teacher is huge, and maybe more important than being pulled out for a one-on-one session. But it's just, again, you know your child best, and knowing your options, I think, is really it's the theme for tonight.
Right, because there are so many things we just don't know, and you know, things are changing so quickly. You know, I just want to be sure that the parents know their rights. They know that just because a school district is presenting a model or saying, you know, that children in grades 3 and up must attend to this hybrid approach, for example, you know, if remote learning doesn't work for your child, then that is not FAPE. That is not free and appropriate public education. And so again, we go back to that idea of, okay, if the district isn't offering in-school learning and remote learning isn't possible, well then, you know, you really get into that discussion of outplacing, of saying, you know, is there a more highly specialized school that my child could attend, you know, at the district's expense? Because what is in their IEP is what they are entitled to. You know, don't allow or accept otherwise. And I just go back to that as, you know, I was working with one family, and the school administrator just kept talking about, you know, writing an in-person IEP versus a remote IEP. And good golly, I just shook my head and I said, an IEP is an IEP. We're not calling it in person. We're not calling it remote, because, you know, an IEP is just that. We're talking about the child's needs. And sure, in a remote setting, will accommodations look different, and will their needs be different? Could some of their services actually need to increase? Like, should we need further consultation with specialists because they're not going to have eyes on kiddos? Absolutely. And that can be written into the IEP in such a way that expresses that. But I wouldn't get bullied into almost writing 2 separate documents. But on that topic, Allie, of accommodations, you know, obviously being an occupational therapist, I've seen a lot of families really struggling with the idea of remote learning, and what sort of accommodations come to mind. And this is kind of, you know, your area of specialty, especially in the area of occupational needs. So can you talk about that at all by chance?
Sure. So, gosh, if your child has an IEP, they already have accommodations in there, right? And that is, those accommodations are to support them in their school day. And your child's school day is going to look different. Even if your child is going to school in person full time, the day is going to look different. So if your child is in person and has difficulty tolerating wearing a mask, that is something you can work towards in their IEP to identify, you know, what kind of masks might they tolerate better? How can we increase wearing tolerance? Just because your child at this time can't wear a mask doesn't mean that they can't attend school, and that's an accommodation you can consider. Also thinking about how the structure of the school day is going to be so different, and children are spaced out, they're spending more time at their desk, things like lunchroom are being eliminated. So building in, you know, my child's gonna need to move. My child cannot sit still in the seat 6 feet away from their peers for the whole school day. So building in movement breaks, building in accommodations like flexible seating, access to fidgets, just thinking about how is this school day going to look different, and what might my child need to be successful in that school. And then if you're doing remote learning, now we're talking about a whole new page of accommodations. And Pam, I know we've talked about this a lot where, you know, your child's IEP is to support them at school. And if you're remote learning, that means school is at home. And what accommodations does your child need to be successful to school at home? And there's, you know, we could do a whole interview, I think, just on different accommodations. But I think a big one that Pam's already touched upon is, you know, if your child isn't able to access part of the curriculum through the remote learning, then, you know, finding a way to have someone come out to the home is what the school district needs to look at, accommodating and providing for your child. Looking at the structure of your remote learning day and building in movement breaks, building in vision breaks, increased time to complete assignments, things like that, as well as just because the education is being presented remotely doesn't mean that your child might not need something physical to support them in learning that. So, you know, having some physical materials to go hand in hand with that lesson, and the school district providing that and being prepared to provide that in advance so your child can fully participate, whether they have a visual deficit, an attention deficit, things along those lines. So just, you know, really being creative and trying to imagine the day and imagine what things your child might need. And the other thing I think that's really important through all of this is to remember that an IEP is, it's a living document. So just because you start off the school year one way with certain goals and certain accommodations doesn't mean that you're stuck with that for the whole school year. So giving yourself that flexibility to try things out and knowing that you can always call another meeting and make changes and work with your team to support your child, and that you don't have to set anything in stone before the school year starts, and trying to set them up the best you can and knowing that you can make changes along the way.
That's such a good point, Allie. Is truly, I mean, an IEP is a living document, and students' needs change, their placements change, they grow, they learn, and you're right. I mean, it's very anxiety provoking though for parents, and I know as a parent, you know, I'm going through this right now with my own son, and as we're preparing, you know, for a remote school year with a child with autism. And we have to be remote because of medical needs, and he cannot return to school, and you know that creates just so many questions, and everything of how is this going to look, what does he need, you know, what should I expect. But I think, you know, those accommodations that you mentioned are really great things to consider. I hadn't even considered, you know, that whole idea of sometimes having material in your hands gives yourself a break, right, from all this remote. I know sometimes I call it unplugging, you know, we call it screen-free Tuesday, or, you know, whatever I tell my kids, and they're all, Mom, no, we want our video games or whatever. But you know, it's a lot for us to take in, and it's a lot for us to expect on our children, especially these kids with special needs. So if it's not working, speak up, say something, call a team meeting. You can call a team meeting whenever you want, and you know, send them your agenda ahead of time. I think that's really helpful for you know, for teams to really have a heads up of why you're calling a team meeting, and what sorts of supports, what specialists really need to be at that meeting. So, you know, don't be afraid to ask for help, I think. And again, too, even if you have the supports and you've never needed in-home supports before, I think now might be a time for you to consider that. You know, I mean, if they're getting remote therapy, maybe they also need, you know, additional supplemental therapy. You know, and again, there are a lot of different options out there. So, you know, don't feel lost, ask questions. You know, we're here to really try and help guide you. But Allie, did we have any other questions that came through?
Yes, I do just want to go through really quickly. Some of these might have been already partially answered, so we might be able to kind of breeze through in the interest of time, but I have another question here. Because of health reasons, I cannot send my child back to in-person school. For her to get FAPE, she needs a one-to-one as is written in her IEP. In the previous school shutdown, I provided her with a one-to-one using my IHS budget. This fall, my school will be returning to work and unable, I think the parent is no longer able to provide that support. So how can she get the school to provide a one-on-one for her remote learning needs?
Great, great. So we did kind of touch upon this briefly. Thank you again for writing to us. If your child has a one-to-one written in her IEP, then she is entitled to that level of support, again, per that Executive Order 64. If I were in your shoes, and again, I just shared briefly, is that, we do have medical needs in our family and my child can't return to school. So I would first request a meeting to discuss her needs for remote learning. Again, I would probably tell the district that in order to meet her needs, they're outlined in her IEP, she requires this one-to-one. And I would make it known too that maybe you did use that budget and that, that's no longer an option. And that if they're unable to meet those needs or unwilling, then your only other option is to really to outplace her or talk about an alternate school who could provide her needs at the district's expense. And I wouldn't be afraid to say that firmly, because if they can't provide that in-home support or contract out with a home-based provider, with there are various nursing agencies who can send out, again, I don't know this particular kiddo and their specific needs, so I'm kind of speculating. But again, the school district has many options. And again, just state your rationale for needing the one-on-one. Again, a lot of districts are really hung up on this idea about data. And, your experience from March through June constitutes as data. So, give examples of whether your daughter is in a wheelchair and needs to be physically moved to a particular area, or if, they're on the spectrum and need frequent redirection to attend to remote learning. Just state your evidence there. So don't give up. Know that your daughter has rights. It's in her IEP, thank the high heavens, and and just be direct with the district and make sure you state your needs. And two, along Allie's points about all those accommodations, before your meeting, I would really think about what supports you put in place that made her successful, and make sure that those are included in the IEP in that portion of accommodations. Whether it's different assistive technology, or there are different devices that your child could use that might help them be a more successful remote learner, or their programs. Again, just thinking outside of the box and be willing to listen to what the district, has to suggest. It's really hard. I call our kids double dippers, right? It's really hard with these kids that have medical needs, but also have considerable special needs. And, so it's really, there aren't many of us, but, the district still has to provide her services and support. So, don't give up, just keep fighting.
Yeah, and I think, really the bottom line is it's already in her IEP, so they need to provide it. And, that's what the executive order is, that's what your rights are, and coming to the table with that, because the school district, if you sign an IEP that doesn't have that, now it's gone. But knowing that you don't, they already offered it and they can't take it back now because of COVID. So
no, they can't. And when
I try.
Yeah, right. I know we did this once the wrong way, and which really brings us to our next question. Really, pertaining, other executive order. Can you go ahead and read that question for me?
So we had a parent asking if you had any advice to parents on whether to do IEP meetings within 30 days of the start of the school year per the governor's executive order. And just for people at home who might not be super familiar with what that's referring to, and please jump in if I'm not summarizing this accurately, Pam, but all students who have an IEP are eligible or required to have an IEP meeting within that first 30 days of returning to school. And that is really to kind of assess, they left school during that crisis school mode and a lot of services were dropped, and then there was summer and ESY happened in various forms for different school districts. So to kind of regroup and see where each child is at for the upcoming school year.
Absolutely, Allie, you said it very well, is that, this executive order, I think, was really truly Governor Sununu's acknowledgement that, during this crisis schooling phase, our children were without services. And it took a while in my own district and for our own family to even start receiving remote services. I want to say it was like 6 or 7 weeks that they were truly completely without any services. And so this is his way of doing a check-in to say, we are acknowledging that children were without services that they needed. And in order for us to evaluate the level of their regression and determine if they are eligible for what they call retroactive services, we need to have IEP meetings and do assessments on our kiddos. And so what retroactive services means is that your child was without services that he or she needed. This can happen if, say, a therapist goes out on maternity leave and a district isn't able to find a suitable placement for her. During the time that he or she was gone, right, and your child didn't receive their therapy that they were entitled to, they need essentially makeup therapy, and so when students were without their therapies or specialized programming, we're bound to see regression. I saw it in my own children, and working with a bunch of my clients right now. That is a lot of parents' concerns, is my child regressed so much. And so I just want to encourage all of you to take advantage of this opportunity, because we don't know if there will be another opportunity to reassess our children's needs.
Can you speak more to that specific piece of reassessment and why reassessing now is a unique situation?
Sure. So again, from what I understand, this is not a full 3-year evaluation. This is looking at the students' needs. There are going to be formal and informal assessments that will be conducted during the first 30 days of school, which will cite the regression. So basically what he's looking to do is to acknowledge that this child has regressed, how much have they regressed, and what supports do we need to put in place. So that might look like a kiddo with a speech and language delay who had speech therapy once a week for 30 minutes in their IEP. And so after this meeting and after they assess the child, they realize, wow, this child has considerably regressed. And in order to close those gaps and bring him back to where he was before crisis schooling started, we need to increase his speech therapy time. So again, I think there will be very few families who won't benefit from this. And so I would encourage you to schedule your team meeting as soon as you're able to, because when you think about, right, those first few weeks of school, if we're looking at, possibly a child with an academic need. So the longer you wait to have that child assessed, the more exposure, right, to the curriculum, they're getting back into the swing of things, they're picking things up. Yeah, catching up. And so, it's something that we want to show right now that they have regressed, because to be honest, your kid is entitled to that time. He or she regressed because of a lack of services or specialized programming. And so the longer you wait, the more practice that your kiddo is just naturally going to get going back to school. And so, again, I just encourage you to have that meeting. It's also going to give you another opportunity to talk about those accommodations and what schooling will look like, and and you might still, depending on the school district and their cooperation, they may be proactively just giving you retroactive services. I've talked to a lot of clients who, and I think it's great. I think it's great that school districts are saying, hey, we know we messed up, and it's because we were in crisis mode, and we don't want to put blame, we don't want to point fingers, but we know your kiddo didn't get his occupational therapy for 6 weeks. So we've calculated this out across the board, and it looks like he'll get another session, session once a week for, the next 6 months, and then we'll revisit if it's still needed. The other thing, that I've seen, I know my own district did this, and it was really disheartening. Was, they kept telling me, oh, Pamela, don't worry, we're going to be really generous with ESY services, and we're going to make up for it then. And our particular district remained remote throughout ESY. And while, I understand they were doing it for precautionary reasons, we never had that opportunity to make up that in-person therapy. So as a result, my kids never got that makeup that they kind of had promised us. So again, just keep good records, try and get things in email. I always tell parents, if someone is offering you something at an IEP meeting or says something, you can always send them an email back and say, oh, per our discussion at the IEP meeting, services will be made up that, Johnny didn't receive the first 6 weeks of crisis schooling over ESY. Am I understanding that correctly? And put it back on the administrator or the staff person who said it, just so you have documentation and it's in your child's record, should they give you, a hard time later. But I definitely think everybody should, meet with their team within the first 30 days of school. That's an executive order. So if you choose to forego, that meeting, that is your choice, that is your right. But the school district must have that meeting within 30 days of school. So mark it on your calendar. And I would say, around day 20, if you haven't heard from your school district about this meeting, reach out to them and be the squeaky wheel, so to speak, and say, hey, per that executive order, I thought we were supposed to meet within the first 30 days of school. It's day 20. And I'm supposed to have 10 days written prior notice about, an IEP meeting. So when are we meeting? Maybe you email them at day 15 to give them a little bit more notice. But no, they're going to be busy too, and they're doing the best they can.
So I think that covers all of our questions that have come in. The remaining questions I think we've talked about pretty thoroughly. I just want to end kind of on a note that you were hinting at a little bit just now. What recommendations do you have for families in terms of going into these meetings and trying to promote, a cooperative, productive IEP meeting when they're feeling like their school district maybe isn't supporting their child in the way that they would like to see them supported.
Absolutely. So a few just recommendations that I always have are first, when you request the meeting, or if the meeting invite notice is sent to you, understand what kind of meeting it is. Is it a transition meeting? Is it a progress update meeting? Is it initial evaluation? Really understanding the purpose of the meeting, which is going to guide your agenda. And so your agenda is something that I think should be collaborative. So I have my own agenda for my child's needs and my questions. Write it down. So write it down. You know, if you have a spouse or a partner, sit down with them too, because they might have very different questions or concerns than you have. If you have any outside therapists or providers that you work with that might come into your home, you know, ask them for their input. I think that that's a really valuable tool, because they're thinking about, you know, the child that they work with from a therapeutic standpoint often, and have a lot of different ideas or suggestions, things coming at it from different angles that you may not have thought of. You can also ask them or see if they can be a part of your meeting. You know, if you suspect that the school district might give you, you know, a difficult time about something that you're advocating for, you know, whether it's a service or whether it's an accommodation or some kind of specialized equipment. If they can't attend the meeting, oftentimes providers will write letters, or you can sign an authorization for providers to communicate with the school district, and you can ask them to reach out to your home-based provider so that they can have those hard conversations. I myself like to be a part of those conversations. So in most of my release forms, just so I understand what's being asked, what the agenda is, and I fully understand, I ask to be a part of those conference calls. That's just something that I think, you know, I'm particular about. Other people might have a really great trust with their school district and not feel that it's necessary. So having an agenda, and I think, you know, really, you know, if you get to the point in an IEP meeting where, you know, everyone's disgruntled, you don't see that there's forward progress, just know your rights, that you can table a meeting at any time. You can say, you know, this meeting is not productive. I feel like my rights are being violated. I feel that you're not hearing my concerns and brainstorming well with me. You know, I'd like to end this meeting, and we can reconvene at a later time. Sometimes I think that, you know, when we get in these heated conversations and topics, that sometimes everybody just needs air and just needs to like walk away and think about the other person's perspective. So, you know, one approach that I take with my company is really this collaborative approach, because anybody who's in education didn't go in it for the money. They, you know, they care about these kids. And most of the time, you know, sure, there's underlying politics and the district budget, and there are influencing factors, but most of the time, the teachers, the therapists who are working with your kids really want them to be successful. And two, you know, I've accepted that there are attributes of things like we talked about in the beginning of this interview about, you know, there are home needs and there are school needs. And so the school is only going to address those areas that impact the child's ability to access the general education curriculum. And as a parent, that was really hard for me to like understand. So, you know, my child has autism and sensory processing disorder. How can you say he doesn't have sensory needs at school? He comes home and he's like, you know, a ping pong ball bouncing off the walls. Well, he's held it together, and there's data to support it, and multiple educators saying it, and the parent volunteer just told me how pleasant my child was, you know, in library to listen to, and I have to just accept it. And that was hard for me as a mom, but you know, I'm thankful that I was able to find him in-home supports groups, you know, of other kiddos who have similar interests. You know that it's hard for all of us. And I think, connecting with other parents with similar special needs often helps. There are so many organizations out there that I could name, and I'll have to put together maybe in our next interview that list. But again, just go in, know your rights, know that an IEP is a legal binding document. I like to remind families of that. And that, the school year is going to look different. So have a little bit of compassion when you can, and be flexible when you can. And give your child a chance. They might surprise you. I've heard from countless families who have said, oh my gosh, remote learning was actually so much better for my child. I never thought it was, but we elected remote learning, not because of health reasons, but because it really worked for him or her.
I think
Yeah.
that's a wonderful, positive message to end on this evening. Was there anything else you really felt like we needed to get out, or I think we covered a lot this evening.
Did.
If people have additional questions or want to hear more about your services, how can people find you?
Sure. I'll link my email to this interview, so folks can send me an interview. Sorry, oh my goodness, it's getting late, isn't it? Folks can send me an email, and my website is still in the works, so hopefully it will be up and running in a few weeks. And Allie, same thing for yourself. I mean, if you have families, who are looking for in-home supports or services, how can they best reach out to you or learn more about your company?
Yeah, so we're on Facebook. Again, we're Adaptive Pediatric Therapy, www.adaptivepediatrictherapy.com. You can always reach out to me via email at akaplin, CAPLIN, @adaptivepediatrictherapy.com. And I did just want to kind of put it out there for families who are looking for support and to connect with each other, that we also do have a few Facebook groups that have been really helpful. We manage New Hampshire special needs parents, as well as New Hampshire special needs school at home. So both of those are great resources to connect with other families, as well as we're always sharing resources and things like that. So that may be where you find this interview, and you already knew about us there anyway. So I hope that this evening was helpful for everyone. Hopefully it left you with more answers than questions. Pamela, thank you so much for your time. I think I hope that families will really benefit from some of the really valuable information you shared tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always here, and don't shy away from sending me questions. I'm here to help as a mom, as an educator, and as an advocate. So it was great chatting with you tonight, Allie, and I hope everyone has a great school year. So thanks again.
All right, thank you.